Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We are really delighted to see not just such a big crowd, but also such a punctual crowd. Very, very pleased that you're joining us and to see many of the people that we've worked with on these issues over the years coming to the meeting. So thank you so much. We are just waiting for Marvin, my co-host. Marvin, please shout if you're in the meeting already and I've missed you. Fantastic. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very excited to be kicking off the first Grand Bargain Community of Practice on participation with so many of you. We've been totally overwhelmed by the number of people who've put their hand up, said yes, and jumped into this, and the number of survey responses. So we've had to slightly tweak today's agenda to reflect the number of people that we have in the room. I hope that my co-host and I have found some good ways of making sure that everyone's views are heard and that we do as much listening as possible in this meeting. So please keep the chat section busy and keep your feedback coming. What I would ask is that given this is quite a big group, that you introduce yourselves. Heather, if we could just go to the next slide, that you introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you're joining us from, and also why you're joining today, what you want out of this group. That would be fantastic. Marvin, I see you are here. So if Heather is able to find you and unmute the mic, unmute your mic, then we can hand over to you to get this meeting started.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the technical problems on my side.
Hi, Marvin.
Well, welcome everybody once again. Like I'll just repeat what Sophie said, that please introduce yourself in the chat box, and who are you and why are you joining us today? Well, we talk about the revolution, the participation revolution, which we believe has never really happened. Yes, there might be a few sparks here and there, but we really didn't see any revolution, even though commitments were made back in 2016 that we'll change everything. We'll bring the communities we serve in the middle, in the center of our universe. But even the report that was done at the Grand Bargain in 2023 clearly mentioned that, the revolution is not taking place. The efforts
Marvin, sorry, just to interrupt you for 1 second. Heather, would you mind moving the slides on? Marvin's got some great slides for this bit. So Marvin, just say next slide when you want the next slide. Apologies for the interruption.
Yeah, can we have the next slide? This I've covered already. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, back. The previous slide, please. Yes, thank you. Like our heading says, the failure is just no more an option. We have seen the ERC's presentation, the funding globally, the support globally, and I would even go to the extent that even the credibility of our sector is going down, and we see very little support increasing anywhere. As we talked about the communities, how they're the center of, should be our center of our universe. I've been monitoring articles and communications in response to the freeze by US government, the decline last year of close to $18 billion to ODA and humanitarian system, and more drops this year. Everybody has been talking, who are the expert, our consultants, our leadership in the sector. Again, what we see at Community World Service is the failure of voices from the field. The people we serve, the communities that receive critical humanitarian support from our sector, their voices, are they going to miss us? Or are they going to raise the voice? Are they going to ask us to come back? And it is truly very important that we come back together on and discuss what's happening right now. Unfortunately, it reminds me of the threats that our sector faced during COVID-19 also. It's just that the current variant of COVID-19, I call it the far right variant now, and it's expanding rapidly. So my request that we all work together and make this community of practice a success. Next slide, please. These are some of the objectives that we have put together here, and we invite you to please add your comments to it, your inputs, your feedback, and your thoughts. Feel free, both on action and advocacy, on evidence for elevating the voices. And like I said, the voices of the communities we serve, and accountability. I know when I started working on accountability, some of us did not really appreciate the terminology called downward accountability, but accountability to the people we serve has to come back as number one important thing for us. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to my colleague, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Marvin. And you'll see I've had a big smile on my face during your presentation, because I'm watching who's coming in and why people are excited about the network. And there's a fantastic group in the room with some really good ideas. So we want to maximize today time hearing from everyone in the room and minimize time hearing from your co-chairs. So I'll be very quick. Heba, thank you. So for this first meeting, what Community World Services Asia and Ground Truth Solutions thought would be useful is to start with a call to action. So we've invited two of the biggest thinkers, the biggest names in this sector, to really give us a bit of a kick, to inject some urgency, to tell us what they want this group to do and tell us what they see is really urgent now. Then we're going to turn to what you want from this group and what you want from this issue area. We've had 42 responses to the survey that we sent out, which were excellent. So we're going to present a little bit what we've heard back from you and open the comment section for you to add, disagree, nuance what you're seeing. Then we see one really immediate and really important opportunity for this group, which is, as Marvin's pointed out, we are at this humanitarian crossroads right now where funding is being slashed. Humanitarian leaders at the highest level are gathering to think, what can be saved? How can we move forward? How can we prioritize? And from our perspective, it is absolutely critical that that reset is driven by communities in crisis, is driven by the people that the reset affects. So we want to have a think together about what that might look like, what we want humanitarian leaders to do, and what this group can offer them in that journey. And then we'll think about a way forward and how to move this group on and hopefully make this group a useful and informative use of your extremely valuable time. Next slide, please. So we've tweaked the agenda a little bit. We'll shortly be done with the welcome. Then we're going to turn to Dr. Jamila Mahmood, the Grand Bargain Ambassador for Participation, to tell us how she sees this issue area and how she sees this group. Then Marie-Rose Romain-Murphy is going to provide a counterpoint and tell us how she sees the issue, what she sees as the main challenges, and hopefully challenge us, this group, to think big and be ambitious. We're then going to talk you through feedback we've heard from the survey, which we hope will be the beginnings of a roadmap for this group. So following this meeting, we will share a draft roadmap based on that feedback and what we hear today. We've then invited a couple of the attendees to provide their response to what they're hearing in the roadmap so far. We'll turn to CEDA, we'll turn to the Somali NGO Consortium, we'll turn to our friends and colleagues at the Localization Community of Practice, Kirsten Hagen from IFRC. Then we're going to turn our minds collectively to how we might support a community-led humanitarian reset. We're then going to close and think about next steps. So an ambitious agenda, but I think we've got the right group for it. So next slide, please, Heba. And just as Heba's turning to the next slide, thank you very much. I am delighted to introduce our first keynote speaker. You will all know her, be very familiar with her work. She has been the origin of the participation revolution and has been with this community every step of the way. She's the Grand Bargain Ambassador for Participation and also the Executive Director at the Sunway Centre for Planetary Health. Welcome, Dr. Mahmood. We hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see Marvin again after so many years. And I also see many friends already introducing themselves in the chat group. Thanks for letting me say a few words. And I think I don't want to repeat what Marvin has said. We did call for a revolution, but we haven't really seen one. And I think, we need to do better. Yes, we are facing a serious crisis in the humanitarian system. And I think many people are saying, what are we going to do in the next 6 to 12 months? But my friends, I think this is going to stay longer than 6 to 12 months. And we've got to be ready to do things very, very differently. I think during this crisis, we need to be guided by our commitment to be accountable to affected people. I think that is the primary premise. And I think we as the Grand Bargain ambassadors did communicate this clearly with all the principals of the Grand Bargain in our letter to them. And you would have seen that the ERC, Tom Fletcher, also urged in his letter to all principals just 3 days ago. So we need to safeguard our needs-based and principled humanitarian approach, but we collectively need to become better at being accountable to the people we serve, and no one can do this alone. But I'm really worried. Is prioritization really being done with affected people? And are organizations really restructuring in line with their commitments to strengthen and empower local and national actors? Are we really on track to shift power? So where does your community of practice come in? My appeal to you, help us, help the humanitarian community to get AAP done well and that we get it right. And how can we do that? I think we need to be as specific in our proposals as possible, based on evidence of what works. I think we've got to stop process discussions. We've got to go on to action. We need to continue advocating, but we need to be very specific in what we are calling for and at what moment in time. And I think we need to be propositional. For example, what needs to happen so that affected people are consulted in prioritization in the very short time frame, but also while moving forward, so that aid organizations and donors more strongly rally behind common standards, such as the core humanitarian standards, and use this standard in due diligence processes. And do you, as community of practice members, think that moving to an area-based coordination approach as proposed under the flagship the way to go, or to be more accountable? Or would having a single community feedback mechanism in countries be a solution? And I think I'd look to this group to identify what has really worked for AAP, specifically what practices have led to improved outcomes. What might be 1, 2, 3 priorities that we should all focus on now to get it right? And whatever reforms are pursued at the moment, help us to understand if it does work from the AAP perspective. We always say that we need to have a people approach as central to our decision-making and our response in humanitarian crisis. And we need to bring the people back into the conversation. As we look at what needs to happen, I want to just say that we have to really think about the bigger framing of what the humanitarian sector will look like. My fear is when the funding is shrinking, organizations will look into their own needs and look at how you do things with smaller money rather than how do you do things differently. And I think that needs to happen. The painful reality, if we really want to survive this and become better in the outcome, we need to more centralize, prioritization and funding and localization. And I think localization and accountability to affected people are so linked, and it's not one or the other, but it's both together. And I think that we need to shift localized funding to and reframing of different UN agencies and INGOs. And we have to end competition in the IAC. We need to face the reality that a rationalization of humanitarian actors may be necessary. And we need to fix the broken link between the humanitarian and development sector. So I think we as ambassadors will engage with you continually, especially the co-chairs, to help all of us push forward on AAP and participation. We'll seek your guidance and advice. We'll also engage with the Grand Bargain signatories at country level through the national reference groups. And with this engagement, we'll certainly also focus on accountability to affected people. As ambassadors, we will soon start consultations to address some of the more structural barriers for transformations of the humanitarian system. And again, we will engage with you to bring your specific proposals on AAP into the conversation. Finally, just to say that we will have an annual meeting of the Grand Bargain in October. At that point, we should not look back at this time right now, recognizes that we have forgotten about affected people. Instead, by October, I hope we should have succeeded in getting one or two things right about AAP. And certainly the 10-year anniversary next year should show us some progress. So I urge all of you as the Grand Bargain Community of Practice on Participation to please play that major role that we hope you play in keeping us focused by being concrete in your discussions and proposals and informing us if we are on the right track. I just want to end by saying, let's not waste a good crisis. Let's use this as an opportunity. It starts with a mindset shift. It starts with us actually letting go of what we're comfortable with. And it really starts with shifting the power. Thank you very much, Sophie and everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmood. What a great start to get us off to. Ambition, clarity, be concrete about what we want, and let's not waste a good crisis. And I like your challenge of thinking about ourselves, sitting at the annual meeting in October, looking back at this period and deciding whether or not we wasted it. So thank you. Really, really great way to start this meeting. Thank you so much. Heba, if I could have the next slide, please. And then it's my very great pleasure to hand over to Marie-Rose Romain-Murphy. All of you on the call, I'm sure, know Marie-Rose. She's a partner for community change and the co-founder of the Haiti Community Foundation. And she has promised to challenge us, set the ambition high, and tell us what she wants to see from this group. So Marie-Rose, over to you. And Heba, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide for this presentation.
First, I want to thank you for organizing this forum and for inviting me. I stand here as a servant leader because I deeply believe in serving communities, and I have all my life. These photos are important. This is from a group called Femmes Coopératives pour la Commercialisation Agricole Coordonnée de Belance. It's a cooperative women's group. It's a women's group in Belance, a rural community of Haiti that got devastated by the 2021 earthquake. They approached the Haiti Community Foundation about building a multi-purpose community and commercial center. What was the idea? Revitalize their community and have the community center double as a shelter in times of disaster. In these photos, they are contributing the 10% of the building cost in stones and gravel. We are not building this center for them. We are building it with them. And I wish you could see the video because you can see the energy and the enthusiasm. Over the past 15 years, my network, the Haiti Community Foundation Network, and I have witnessed and benefited firsthand from the incredibly generative power of community leadership and ownership. The many issues that international organizations often face at times are not issues for us. Security, when you work with community leaders after a disaster and make sure that the supplies reach the people who need them the most and don't end up in the homes of local mayors, girlfriends, friends, and relatives, you face almost no security issues. When the government's water resource department tells you that you cannot work on the reparation of a major cistern because they have plans that, by the way, don't really exist, you just inform the community. They do their magic and the barriers get removed. The structural change that all societies need to build a more balanced and just world cannot happen without community leadership and ownership. We are facing and dealing with tectonic changes in many global South cultures, including mine. We believe in the guidance and protection of our ancestors. A few weeks ago, as I, like you, saw the aid sector unravel, I asked my ancestors to guide me and give me more strength. We are all witnesses to the painful reality that millions of Black and brown people are suffering and millions more will die as a result of these drastic and abrupt cuts in aid funding. It's deeply enraging. However, many of us are also seeing an opportunity for the needed transformation of the sector into what it needs to be, a platform and a vector for solidarity, inclusion, and community-led sustainable change. I have a few comments. The electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. This is a quote by Owen Harari. It was never enough to improve systems. It's not enough to improve systems. We need to reinvent them and tap into people and communities' powerful energy. Many talk about the participation revolution. It is a step in the right direction. Many years ago, when I heard the term, I thought, do I want to participate in the development of my country, or do I want to lead it? The answer is that we need to lead it. It is more than time for a leadership revolution. Nation building. Many donors and funders talk about how they do nation building. This is wrong. Citizens and leaders of Global South countries are the ones who should design and work on nation building, while donors and international stakeholders should support it. What we really need, people, is a partnership reconstruction movement. Let's face it, people. The truth is that no matter how progressive we are, we tend to limit ourselves to the formulas and the silos that are foisted upon us. We need to break down the silos and open ourselves to new formulas. At the Bogota Shift the Power Summit, I said that if the Haitian revolutionaries that led Haiti to independence in 1804 had written a proposal to ask donors to support the making of the first Black Republic and abolish slavery, their proposal would have deemed ludicrous and impossible and been rejected. Well, as we are now facing a time when the very soul of our humanity is getting tested, it is time to reach for the impossible. Like Nelson Mandela said, it is always impossible until it's done. Let's listen to Madiba. The status quo is very good at trapping us with reports and log frames and hindering our ability to imagine and work together on our dreams and our true aspirations. Only collective and strategic action through collaboration and connection will help us change the world. Thomas Sankara, the visionary Pan-African leader who accomplished so much in his time of leadership, said the following: "We cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from non-conformity, the courage to turn back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. It took the madmen of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of those madmen ESAID. We must dare to invent the future. Thank you. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Mary Rose, and what a challenge to us. Let's allow this group to be a group of madmen inventing the future. A real challenge to think big. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate both of your interventions to get us started. So I'm afraid it's so hard to follow both of those opening presentations, but it's back to me to talk you through what we heard from the 42 of you who filled out the survey. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Heather. We sent out a survey essentially asking, at this moment of crisis, what do you all want from the participation revolution? What is important to you in this agenda? What does success look like? And how can this group support? And we had some really fantastic responses. And I also see in the chat some really, really interesting conversations playing out. So we will try, don't stop, keep these coming. We'll try and capture all of these in the note that we send out. We've summarized 42 really rich pieces of feedback, so I'll try and touch on the main points. But there is a much more detailed document that summarizes the feedback that we can share with all of you. But just to run through a few of the key points, what I would love us to do is, as I'm running through the key points that we got from the survey, in the chat, please add, subtract, nuance, redirect, comment on what you see here, and we'll make sure that that's all captured in the roadmap, the way forward document that we will share with you. So we asked, what's the one big change that you want to see to make progress on the participation revolution? Unsurprisingly, this shifting power and decision-making to local communities came back from so many of you, and many of you had really interesting suggestions about what that looks like. One really key theme here is let's avoid tokenism. Let's not make this a tick box exercise. Let's not make this an add-on or something that we think of as like a luxury part of programming, but let's make this central to everything that we do. And let's ensure that when we're talking about power and decision making to local communities, we're talking about communities leading needs assessment, designing programs, having a say in the allocation of funding, and having a say in the decision over whether or not that funding was spent well. So let's make this real, and let's see rapid progress. We also saw a bunch of answers around meaningfully including a much more diverse group of voices, both at the community level. So let's make sure we're including everyone, including the most marginalized at the community level, but also at the global levels, processes like the one we're talking about at the moment. Let's make sure that we have true diversity and representation influencing those processes. A lot of you talked about fundamental reform of the aid system, and that's playing out very clearly in the comments, I think. You talked about dismantling power structures. You talked about, for many of you, getting rid of the clusters was an important part of that, and replacing the humanitarian architecture with an architecture that is more community-driven, people-centered, and responds more exactly to what communities in crisis want and need. We saw lots of ambition around more direct and flexible funding to local actors, empowering local organizations and leaders to take charge, with INGOs and the UN playing a more intermediary and supportive role, gradually moving into the background and setting out their exit strategies. And some of you also felt that capacity building and information sharing and creating platforms, democratizing data was an important part of this switch. Next slide, please, Heather. We also asked, how would we know we were on the right track? If we're having this meeting in 18 months' time, what would we want to see in the world that would tell us we're moving in the right direction? You talked about humanitarian response being increasingly driven by communities. That looks like community voices are present in joint response planning, communities at risk are doing their own needs assessment, are having more of a say over the allocation of funding, are doing more around the evaluation of responses. We had some ambitious targets around direct and flexible funding to local actors. 50% was a number that popped out a lot. I think given how short we are of the current 25% goal, that's ambitious, but I like to see it. Direct and flexible funding to local actors, with an emphasis on funding that enables local actors to call the shots and to create their own programs and follow their own priorities. You wanted to see more inclusive decision-making facilitated across all sectors, and there was a bunch of creative ideas about how we can use AI and online platforms and digital solutions to make that happen, which were quite exciting. You want to see metrics on community participation. Let's not just say that we want to see this happen. Let's set out precisely what that would look like and then transparently measure progress against it. You want to see these changes to the aid architecture and coordination reflecting shifting power. Again, a discussion of that going on in the chat right now. And make sure that local leadership is sustainable. So we're looking for local revenue generation exercises. We're doing this in a coordinated way. International NGOs are making exit plans. This isn't a bunch of boutique projects across the world that will then crumble into nothing. This is a movement, and this is built for the long term. Next slide, please, Heather. What should we avoid? Lots of really great responses here. This can't be tokenistic. We can't simply add a feedback mechanism onto the end of a project and say that we've ticked the box on participation. As Marie-Rose has pointed out, that's not enough, even nearly enough. We need to make sure that we're including everyone. We're not excluding certain people and communities in the name of community leadership. We're not falling into communities' own power imbalance challenges. We want to avoid, as I just mentioned, unsustainable, aid-dependent and kind of externally driven approaches. We want to avoid making this too technical and siloed. And I think, as Marvin said, that's maybe one of the challenges that we've had to date, in that we've all been on this journey together, but we've been conducting the journey in quite different boxes with different names for ourselves. So let's come together and inject some urgency into this. Avoid business as usual. We had some great comments about avoiding duplicating the same failing systems and copy pasting the international system to the national level. This is different. As Marie-Rose has said, this is we need to be the madmen of the present, creating the clarity of the future and thinking differently. Lots of cautions around don't ignore or assume community preferences and expertise. This isn't for a group like ours to decide what it is that communities want. This has to be led by the communities themselves. And don't treat accountability like a program bolt-on or like something that is a luxury add-on if you have the money or the time. This needs to be central to everything we do. Next slide, please, Heather. And I promise this is the last one before I hand the mic over. We asked, what role do you want this group to play? And we had some really clear and interesting answers here. Can this group please lead collective advocacy for system change? Can we be a common and clear voice holding the system to account for making the changes they've said they'll make? Can we facilitate connection and dialogue? Can we use this group to bring together different organisations working on this issue, in particular bridging some of the grassroots work and grassroots organisation with these global processes in which other members of this group sit? That feels like a really useful role for the group. Can we together have set out a clear shared vision for what the participation revolution should look like? Yes, I would love to see us do that. Can we play a role in monitoring progress and holding organisations to account for that progress? Can we be a source of practical solutions, as Jamila said, and actionable guidance? Let's not just say everyone's getting it wrong. Let's be clear about what getting it right looks like. And again, I think a fewer number of people thought that this group could play a role in capacity building initiatives. That is a really quick run through some really rich feedback. And as I say, I'm happy to share the detailed feedback document in case any of you want to dive into it in more detail. But we'd love now to hear from several of you in the room. So we've teed up a few people to respond to this. And first of all, we're going to turn to Anna Ram, who is the Deputy Director for Humanitarian at CEDA. So Anna, let us know what you think about what you've heard so far, any challenges to us, anything you want to see done differently. Anna, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. And thank you so much for the kind invitation to share CEDA's and my view in this important meeting. It's a real pleasure to meet you all online. I would like to start off saying, as Ambassador Mahmoud said, this is a real moment of change for the humanitarian system. And I guess as we adapt to shrinking resources and transform the system and mechanisms for aid delivery and coordination, we also, I guess, have an opportunity to empower crisis-affected people by giving them a stronger voice regarding the aid they receive. And this is a time to make serious and urgent prioritizations on how humanitarian protection and assistance is planned and delivered. At CEDA, we continue to be, I would say, firmly committed to a principled and impartial allocation of the limited resources that we have. This requires comparable needs analysis across crises, and it should still go hand in hand with increasing local participation, ensuring affected communities and people have a say in both the type of assistance and how the aid should be distributed. As such, I would like to start off by welcoming this initiative to convene a community of practice on a participation revolution. I think the ambition of this community of practice should be something that should move beyond consultations to create effective synchronized accountability mechanisms and provide practical solutions to include affected people's voices in decision making. As a donor, we value this community of practice effort to produce evidence on the link between participation, localization, and better outcomes for those in need. I think this will also guide us towards funding more sustainable approaches and helping people become more self-reliant. And at a time of severe cuts, as we see today, it's also crucial to preserve modalities for how support reaches affected populations that we know are better at upholding human dignity, such as cash assistance, for example. So what will SIDA do to help the participation revolution move forward? Well, we will continue to drive priorities in locally led humanitarian action, including recognition and strengthening of local and national actors, ensuring equitable partnerships between actors, and we will pilot direct funding to local and national actors in the years to come. We have already started that process. We will continue to advocate for other donors, other funders, to increase their flexible funding to provide space for adaptive responses based on dialogue with affected populations. And we do expect all of our partners to be able to clearly explain how they have designed and adapted their programs based on communities' priorities and feedback. There, of course, at the same time, will be no way for us to fill the gaps from the US funding cuts. We're focusing on potential targeted investments instead to support key functions in this humanitarian system, including maintaining the ability to understand needs and reach people in areas with high access constraints. We will also prioritize crises that are most affected by these cuts. And finally, SIDA is following the discussion on opportunities of reform in the humanitarian system very closely. And looking ahead, we do agree the voices of the communities that we serve cannot be lost in these new circumstances and should be part of the decisions that concern them. And I would really encourage this group to be actively engaged in discussions around the humanitarian reset announced by the ERC, and to ensure a coordinated voice from actors that support greater participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really clear and really helpful. And I like the challenge to stay involved in the humanitarian reset. That's something that we will dive into later. Thank you so much. We also wanted to turn for a response to what you've heard so far and any additional challenges to us to Nemo Hassan, the Executive Director of the Somali NGO Consortium. So Nemo, I think we have given you control of the mic. Over to you.
Yes, you have. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation as well. Just to say that I've been asked to do a real-time reaction to the presentation, and I've been jotting too many notes as I was listening to the great interventions of those who spoke before me and to the survey. And to be honest, one of the things that I'm wondering is what is new? There's you know, on everything that's been said and I heard, I don't think none of it is new, but I think what is missing is how do we do this? We failed to do it previously. We've not 10 years on. The grand bargain commitments have not been met at all. So what do we need to do differently for us to achieve that? And especially in light on where we don't have the luxury of funding, and just to bring us back to the funding cuts in the last 8 weeks now. Where did organizations cut the first? They cut from local partners and local organizations who are at the forefront. So we're not cutting where it's less impactful for us to cut. We're not looking at the impact these decisions have been made, but we're cutting, organizations are cutting from where it's easiest to cut from, which is we got a stop order from a donor, therefore, as an INGO or a UN, we're stopping the national organizations to also deliver to the communities. Now, a lot of these national and local actors are not in a position to have insurance and unrestricted funding. So they are actually closing doors, which means we are losing existing relationships and partnerships as well. So if this is an indication of how things are moving, then we're not going in the right direction. And I was also thinking, as you were presenting these great and fantastic ideas and input, I was thinking, what power does this group have to ensure your ambitious kind of where should we be in 2026? I was saying, well, how are they going to achieve that? We're setting ourselves to fail because we're not the power holders. I'm assuming many people who are in this group are not the power holders, but we do need to hold account. We need to speak truth to power. So in that sense, from the advocacy perspective, definitely. In terms of coming up with systems and processes, I'm not sure. I think we have enough systems and processes, but how do we act and where did we fail in order to act? And looking at this, the letter from Tom Fletcher on the humanitarian reset, just looking at that text, how much has local NGO participation been mentioned? I think one is them being part of the cluster system, and another one is that funding needs to be allocated to them. But nothing been mentioned about equitable partnerships when we're doing these reprioritizations. Nothing has been put in there to say that they need to be part of the system, the decision-making process system. Nothing has been mentioned about their power to influence, whereas at the country level or the global level. And it's not mentioned this inclusivity of making these decisions. So for me, I sit here as a practitioner, like all of you on the call, we're all trying to do a great job, but I am afraid that we might not hold the power to change this. But so one of it was to say, are we going in the right direction? Yes, we are going in the right direction in getting this community of practice organized, but what powers? Where do we need to put our focus? Where do we need to put? So we need to be true to ourselves in the way we want to change and influence how decisions are made and who is inclusive and where do we make these decisions. And absolutely agree with the speaker who said, this could be an opportunity, this crisis could be an opportunity for us to do things differently. But the way I see it now and the conversations I've been involved, we're actually doing what we've been doing all along. Maybe it's difficult to break out from organizational cultures. It's difficult to break out these silos, but we really do need to, in order for us to survive. And we don't only need to survive, but we need to deliver and have an impactful change to the communities that we serve. So organization survival, but maybe you break down as an existing system now, but you come back up as one that is revitalized, one that can support communities, one that puts communities, a system that puts communities at heart, but not fighting for our existence as organizations, but fighting for our existence to be more effective support and responsive system to the communities. So we really need to be getting comfortable with the uncomfortability of what we face. We need to plan and have these conversations based on the reality on the ground now. It's a very different reality than we have. We don't have the same luxuries as we did 10 years ago when it comes to the ground bargain, and we could not achieve what we wanted to achieve in the ground bargain. So how are we doing this, and how are we ensuring that we're supporting each other to be able to achieve what we're supposed to achieve back in 2016 when the ground bargain was announced. So thank you. I think I'll leave it there. Back to you, Sophie.
Thanks so much for those reflections, Nemo. Super helpful. And yeah, it's also been top of my mind these last few days preparing for this meeting. What power does this group have? And actually reflecting on it, while you're absolutely right that we're not a mandated group, we're not operational, I think looking at some of the people in the chat and in the room, thinking about the access they have, the knowledge they have, the connections they have, I think your advocacy point is a really good one. If this group decides that something needs to happen, there are some people within the group, and I think the power of the collective can be quite useful in pushing things forward. Fernanda, I see you have, oh, was that an accidental hand or a real hand? We're going to pass to Kirsten Hagen. I see in the chat a couple of you have been asking about the relationship between this group and the localization community of practice. We've been in close touch with Kirsten and her team on the localization community of practice, and I think our watchword here is no one wants to go to more meetings than they have to. We have lots of areas in common. We'd like to work together as closely as possible. So what we've asked Kirsten to do is to listen in to this call today and just reflect on where she sees those areas of overlap, those areas where we could come together, those areas where we could maybe reduce the number of meetings that people are in. So Kirsten, over to you for your thoughts.
Sure, and thank you so much for the information to be here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names and faces, and to listen to Nemo speak, I always feel a little bit inspired, so thank you for that as well. It's also fantastic to see the level of interest and support for localization and locally led action within this group from everyone who's spoken already. And just taking what Nemo just said about we shouldn't be fighting for ourselves, but for communities. And I think it's pretty clear from what's been said that those on this call believe that locally led humanitarian action is a really critical way to actually do that. I also wanted to just recognize that for many people on this call, it's been a really difficult few months, both in terms of concerns around the communities you're working with and also in terms of your own teams and organizations. So I recognize that this is a really challenging moment, and I think it's great that we're coming together to think positively about how we can move forward in a positive way. I, for one, have been really concerned, and I know many of you have, about the impact on communities and also on the local organizations supporting those communities, and hearing too many stories of organizations that do brilliant work that have effectively been turning off the lights and having no more capacity to move forward. So really, really hoping that this reset, as it was framed, we can find a way that that reset supports effective locally led action and that we don't lose what gains have been made. So, endorsing also what Jamila said in this regard. So the localization work stream, as you would all know, like all the other work streams, closed down last year. When it did, there was a really clear indication from those who were part of it that the work wasn't done yet. Yes, there'd been some successes. So there'd been, facilitation of agreements around key details on how to progress on partnerships, on financing, on capacity strengthening. There were guidance notes and so on. But when you look at the real impact, really long way to go still. There was also not only a recognition that we hadn't achieved all of our goals, but also that there was a desire to keep working together and to see if we could identify in particular where we could really have an impact, recognizing, short period of time and everybody's large portfolio of work, which I would guess right now has just doubled. And so the need to really identify where we can have an impact. So just in terms of some background on where we're at now, a number of organizations expressed an interest to set up the community of practice. We were one of the co-chairs before, initially alongside the Swiss and then alongside Denmark. Rather than going back for the co-chairmanship model, we pushed for this idea, collectively there was a push, I'd say, for an idea of a steering committee, trying to have representatives from different groups, different backgrounds, making sure there were national NGOs, local NGOs, INGOs, UN, Red Cross, donors, and so on. That is not complete, I would say. If there are those who are keen to be part of a steering group driving this forward, we're certainly looking for those who would want to do that. There's also been work to develop a sort of a first draft of the terms of reference, and we're hoping to hold the first meeting of the community of practice in the next few weeks. An invitation hasn't yet gone out, but I really hope it will be in all of your inboxes within the week, just trying to pin down a date with Ambassador Bessler, who, like Jamila, is one of our leads in this particular area. So the different objectives that had been put forward, and I think that how we do these and what we prioritize is absolutely up for discussion in terms of A, does this fit with what's going on right now? Is it what's most needed? B, how do we make sure that we're not duplicating what is happening in this stream of work? What doesn't need to be done in the localization one perhaps is being done here, or vice versa, and how do we reinforce? But the specific objectives that were identified, and we also did a survey and also had a lot of bilateral discussions and group discussions and so on, was firstly the importance of really focusing on how to increase investment in capacity strengthening, including through sharing of good practices, but also supporting the initiative of the Grand Bargain ambassadors on this specific priority. Secondly, on how can we really promote equitable partnerships, including action to implement the outcomes of the caucus on the role of intermediaries, and starting but not limited to equitable sharing of overheads and tracking and transparency of funding. The third piece was around promoting improved funding through increased action, again, to implement the outcomes of the caucuses on funding for localizations, include transparent reporting, tracking of funds, improved access to pooled funds, including locally led funds. And then the fourth one was really around promoting local leadership, decision-making, and inclusive coordination. So I think none of this is new, but that's the outcomes of our survey and discussions. And I think it's important to note that as other outstanding barriers and gaps on implementation of the localization commitments might come out from the group, that would absolutely want to be focused on as useful as well. So in terms of the next steps, as I said, we're hoping to have the first community of practice meeting within the next few weeks. I know that our Grand Bargain Secretariat colleagues will push that out to everybody on the email list. So if you're not on the old workstream email list, I wouldn't worry about that. We're also really keen to work out how we work with this group. So I would say accountability of affected populations and locally led action or localization, as Jamila said right at the beginning, are really deeply connected. So important to coordinate, collaborate, reinforce, and not duplicate. So I would say open to the group, really keen to hear how best we can do this and work together. And as Sophie wisely said, let's not have too many meetings on the same thing, but let's, focus our work and attention. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm not sure that I am the expert here. I think better to learn from all of you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. And just to echo that, we're really keen to work with you guys as closely as possible. So Marvin and I will stay in close touch with Kirsten and her team, and where we see areas where we're both pulling in the same direction, I think makes great sense to merge. So thank you very much for your thoughts there. I have to apologise because there were one or two other people who I had promised I would hand the mic to if we have time. I'm just going to move us on now, and we will come back to you at the end if we have time, just because I want to maximise the time that we have for the virtual discussion coming up. So hopefully we'll come back to you guys at the end. I mentioned at the beginning when we were looking at the agenda, and all of our speakers have referenced this, that there feels like a really immediate and quite urgent opportunity, because as Nemo said, this is already moving, and it's moving not in the right direction in some regards. So you'll all be aware, of course, that given the cuts in funding, we are now looking at a humanitarian reset. We're having to do humanitarian assistance with a lot less, and as Marvin mentioned at the beginning, we feel like that could go in one of two ways. It can be a politically driven fight to the death from the top down, where organisations try and put a claim in what they would like to do, and it becomes a question of power. And I think the data that we have at Ground Truth Solutions suggests that would result in a lot of harm, a lot of mismatch between needs and the assistance that's provided. Or, as all of our speakers have alluded to, this could be an opportunity for reimagining, and this could be a process that puts communities truly at the centre and listens to what communities want and need. So when we originally envisaged this, this was going to be a discussion, but I think with 180 of you online, that's not practical. So we've tried to move this discussion into the digital realm. We'll see how well it works. So if you could go on your phone to menti.com and enter this number, or use the QR code. Let us know in the chat if you are having any challenges. I'll just leave that up for a couple more seconds. And then Heather's going to take us over to the Menti slides. We're going to pose 3 questions here, and let me explain what we want to do with the answers to these questions. So I think Nemo pointed very rightly to the fact that one of this group's key added values is that it brings together so many people working on the same thing across different types of organisations, across different areas of engagement. If we can come together with one voice, we are in a really powerful position to advocate for the change we want to see. And I think what we're seeing in the chat and what we've seen in the discussion so far is we have a lot of common goals here. What we would like to try is, off the basis of this discussion today, to draft a joint statement that is aimed at the IASC principals as they engage in this humanitarian reset, that says not only we call for a community-driven humanitarian reset, but also here's how this group can support, and here's precisely what we want to see. This might not work, but we want to crowdsource your views on this. So Heather, if you could switch us over to the Menti slides, assuming that everyone's on. Thank you. So the first question is, if we are calling for a community-centered humanitarian reset, for this prioritization exercise to be truly driven by what communities want and need, what concretely do humanitarian leaders need to do to enable that? So what precisely are we asking for? I'll give people a few minutes. Yeah, supporting mutual aid approaches, really interesting. There's been a super interesting discussion in the chat on Sudan emergency response rooms with some fantastic resources shared there. Focus on the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, absolutely. Ensuring that community engagement is funded. And changing the way that community needs are determined. Heather, just letting you know, oh, Heather's put that link in the chat. Okay, I'll open at the end of each of these questions, I'll open for maybe one comment or piece of feedback. If anyone is sitting on a brilliant idea here or is itching to jump in with a question or a comment, please raise your hand and I'll bring you in. Yeah, we have the CHS, why don't we use it? Great suggestion. Push for national NGOs to be at the table. Objective humanitarian coordinator. There are some brilliant ideas here. And while this is all moving too fast to see, I promise we will put these into the meeting notes so you can read them in full. Okay, fantastic. So I don't see any hands up to jump in and comment on what we've just seen. So we'll move to the next question, which is following Jamila's challenge to be as concrete as possible. We've talked about what humanitarian leaders need to do to enable a community-led humanitarian reset. What would they need in order to do that? What data, ideas, support, resources would humanitarian leaders with the IOC principles sitting around the table need to do this well? Give people a few minutes. Yeah, minimal, good enough data. We tend to gather more than we need. Yeah, I like that. An open call for all organizations working in a given location to provide information on their partners. Yeah, local data, host government commitment, courage, true. Yeah, focus on the CHS commitments again. I think those have been mentioned as a standard that exists and we should use better, agreed. That's an interesting suggestion. They need a mindset and culture shift, so should probably resign from their role as leaders. Community mapping. Including affected people and communities in all relevant coordination platforms. I love that as a suggestion. Grief counselling around their own roles. I'll stop reading these out loud and give people a couple of minutes to think about this. Fantastic. There's such good responses rolling in. Not to highlight any above any others, but I do want to draw people's attention to one very innovative suggestion in the chat, which I like. Lobby for 1% of funding from major sporting competitions to be channeled to the SURF. Why not? Brilliant. Thank you. A 365-degree review by the community. It's an excellent idea. Thank you. Brilliant ideas rolling in. And again, we will share all of these after the meeting. We have one final question on the Mentimeter, which is perhaps the most challenging. So Hebe, if you're happy to move us on. Brilliant. So Nemo set us the challenge. Who is this group? Like, how is this group going to move this forward? And I think that's exactly the right challenge. And as I say, foremost in my mind. But we want to set you the challenge of thinking, what resources, connections, data and knowledge are we sitting on in this group? Either you individually, your organisation, someone else you've seen in the chat that you think could help to move the needle on this. So what can we offer as a group that will help drive a community-driven reset? Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time and thought to reflect on that. Keep them coming. The Menti will stay live for the next day and a half, I think. So if you have any ideas outside of this meeting, please feel free to add them. What we are proposing to do with this information is, as I mentioned, to write a very short and simple joint statement, which obviously people on this call can choose to sign up to or not, rather than trying to edit it into something that everyone is completely happy with. We will include the information we've had up top about this being a crossroads moment for humanitarian assistance. We, as this Participation Revolution Community of Practice, call on leaders for a community-driven humanitarian reset. That for us is what this entails. That's what it would look like. And here is how this group could support. And then we'll open that up for signature over the next couple of days. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to open now, and I'm delighted that we have time for this. I'm going to open up now for any questions or comments, reflections on what you've heard. Feel free to intervene in whatever way you want, but I think brilliant ideas for how this group could be used to make a difference would be particularly welcome. So Heather, if you could just move to the next slide that we have in the background. I had spoken to Helen from CDAC earlier, who wanted to jump in with a few ideas. So delighted, Helen, to be able to hand the mic. Do you have control of the mic? Yes, delighted to be able to hand the mic over to you.
Hi, Sophie, and hello everybody. And first things first, I think we're in safe hands. You're saying what smart things can this group do? Well, convening it was smart, getting these brilliant people together was smart, and I think that we're looking at a lot of energy and ideas here already. So thank you very, very much for doing it, and for all of the speakers who were really very inspiring. I also came away thinking like just how much more creative and imaginative can we really attempt to be, and it takes time to do that thinking and to do the imagining, but very, very much up for that in the spirit of collaboration and not duplicating and trying to figure out like how we all link together. It'd be good to have a map of these different conversations at some point, but one conversation that we have been doing in the CDAC network over the last 18 months is to try to anticipate what kind of challenges are happening or opportunities that are happening that are affecting the ability of communities themselves to have voice and agency and take power. And the two big trends that we're focused down on, right? Because the participation revolution is huge and the locally led action is huge. And there's lots of people on this and doing great work. So we're just focusing now narrowly on what could new AI-enabled technologies offer to really accelerate people's voices into this space, and if so, on what conditions and what grounds would it be good enough to make those sorts of tools available, and how do we accelerate that? And that is absolutely even more important in light of what's happened in the last 2 months, as we're seeing the system as we know it imploding in many places. And there is a rush to look for understandable efficiencies in the system. And so we really need some very rapid, practical advice on what kind of terms and conditions do we negotiate with tech companies. And if we're thinking about doing participation differently and running AI through different data sets that we have, what kind of considerations do we have to think about in relation to humanitarian principles and values? And many of the members in the CDAC community have already been thinking about this. So we've got good things to say. And we've just launched a new project to try to get some of those tools in place. And we also have a community of practice talking about some of these tools and platforms that can be used. So we'll send that in and encourage you to then divert people that want to talk about that specific bit to us. And then the other thing to flag is that we are living sadly in a time of information disorder. And even if we get to the stage of having really clever comms, really amazing things for the communities to be able to say, we have to be really wise to the manipulation that is ongoing around the narratives around aid. So there's also some work going on if people are interested to join on harmful information and how we make sure that people on the ground can still have their voices heard. Voila, that's enough for me. But please, again, huge thank you to you guys for doing this, and look forward to staying in touch and continuing to collaborate more.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. If others in the chat, and there are some such interesting conversations playing out in the chat, which we will record, but if others online have burning questions, comments, challenges, please do raise your hand and we will give you control of your mic and call you in. Just because we don't currently have any hands raised, Mary-Rose, Jamila, I wonder if you would like to reflect on what you've heard so far and whether you feel members of the group, this group, is living up to the challenges that you set us at the beginning.
Where's Jamila? I know how to talk. She started, and I feel like she should. At any rate, these are difficult times. I just love a lot of the comments, and I love the fact that some people are thinking, I mean, forget about, outside the box, but also thinking about making new boxes. So the key thing is going to be leveraging all of this. And, and again, and I know maybe it sounds nebulous, but I will tell you that we do have to believe in our own power. We do. I mean, if I had listened to all of the naysayers 15 years ago that kept telling me, oh, I would not be able to do, we didn't have the capacity to launch a community foundation. We didn't have the capacity to do regional planning. We didn't have the capacity. We were not doing this. We were not doing that. I would have done nothing. And instead, we built a network and we built a formula of community-led development that really has been transformational. So, I mean, I do want to encourage people, and I know it's scary because there are times where I'm scared to embrace their own power. And for collective action, the other day I was in a meeting and it was fascinating. There was this one Nigerian humanitarian leader, and he said he showed a bunch of sticks. And I want to share that because I think it was very powerful. It stayed with me. And he said, I keep that in my office. And he took one stick, one small stick, he broke it. He took another one, he broke it. Then he took the rest of them and tried to break them as they were together. And he could not. And that's the idea. We have too many silos. We have too many decisions, secret agendas, egos, empire building, scams, and everything else. The moment we're living is too critical. Forget about COVID. It's just another one. And when I talk about Black and brown people dying, you think about some of the politics and all of this, and you connect the dots. It's scary. We have to wake up and then really sort of like try to come together and try to have some action.
Thank you so much. And you've now, your words have been so inspiring that you've emboldened others to put their hands up. So we've got some additional feedback from others in the room. Pamela, can I hand to you? I think, hold on, a technical issue. Let me give you control of your microphone. There we go. Pamela, over to you. You're on mute, I think. We can't hear you, but you should be able to unmute yourself now. See if I can do it for you. I'm afraid, Pamela, we can't hear you. Can you try unmuting yourself one last time? If not, we'll come back to you and see if there's a technical issue. Sorry, we'll come back to you. I'm not sure what's going on there technically. We'll come back to you. Carla, I saw your hand was up. Carla, over to you. Hope you don't have the same issue. Ah, okay, Heber, we might need you to... Should be able to unmute. I've enabled your mic. Oh, that's strange. Should be because I've enabled your mics, but apologies for that. Yeah, my sincere apologies for that technical blip. I don't know what's happening. Apologies. Yeah, please do feel free to add your comment in the chat, and I'm really sorry for that. I don't know what's happened there. Okay. So if we can't hear in person from people, I don't want to keep you all here longer than is absolutely necessary. As all the speakers have said, and as Kirsten very empathetically pointed out, and where we should have started, I know these are really tough times for everyone, and we're having these conversations in extremely difficult and resource-constrained circumstances where, you know, as well as thinking about doing good in the world, I think probably every one of us on this call is thinking about our job and what we'll be doing next week and how our organisation will survive. So these are really, really tough times. Thank you all so much for your active participation today. The chat section has absolutely been on fire. There are some more brilliant ideas in the chat than I've seen in many years of reading about this, so we will make sure to share those far and wide. Heber, if you could just move to the next steps slide. Doesn't say much, only next steps. So huge thank you for your participation. Our promise to you as co-chairs is that we will reflect all of the brilliant feedback that we've had today. We'll share something like a roadmap. I think roadmap is probably quite a grandiose title because as many of you have said, we've got high ambitions and we're a little bit behind on the how so far. But we'll share a document that summarises what this group wants to see done in the participation space, what this group wants to see avoided, what success looks like, and then what we as a group think that we can contribute. So we'll share that for comment and additional inputs. We'll also, as I mentioned, draft a joint statement based on the inputs that we've had today to the IASC principles around this notion of a community-led, people-centered humanitarian reset and what that might look like. We'll keep that short and simple, and we'll circulate it for signature, and that can be the first joint product of this group. Once we've had feedback on the roadmap, we'll also set the next meeting for June. I think it probably makes sense at this time to hold these meetings quarterly. We will continue to try and make this big group a space for exchange, a space for ideas, a space for evidence, a space for holding to account. And as Kirsten mentioned, they're doing on the localization side, if there are particular issues that have come out of the chat today where you think, actually, this is brilliant and we should convene a bunch of like-minded people around this, I would really encourage any member of this group to put their hand up to lead a spin-off group, a sub-working group, even a small group of like-minded people to put some ideas together and make a change. And we're happy for this to be a platform for all different sorts of initiatives like that. So given our technical challenge of not being able to invite anyone else to speak, I'm going to end things there a few minutes early and just say a huge thank you to you all for participating. Lots and lots of food for thought, lots of legwork for us as co-chairs to do in getting all of these brilliant ideas out and back to you. Thank you so much for your time today, and I really hope that this group can make a difference at what is an absolutely critical time. Thank you so much.